Throughout the history of Wuthering Waves, the game was praised for its lack of power creep. Even to this day, over a year after the game's release, older characters can still comfortably clear content for the most part, or find ways to keep up with newer releases. However, in recent times, this very controlled, gradual progression in power suddenly spiked due to the release of a new unit. For the very first time, Wuthering Waves has seen its first instance of power creep so fast it could be deemed problematic. The culprit behind it? It's none other than Phrolova. Wuthering Waves has always had power creep. We would be lying to ourselves denying this. For example, if we take raw single target damage in a vacuum, the first DPS in the game, Qiuyuan, was power crept by Jinshi and Camellia in the same version. Those two were then edged out by Carlotta and Zani later on, and then they were once again crept by Cardathea. The power ceiling of single target damage has pretty much stayed there since. Now, almost every long-lasting gacha game has power creep. Some argue that it is inevitable or even necessary. The reason why Wuthering Waves' power creep has been largely unproblematic is due to how gradual it is. New units don't always necessarily outperform older ones, and when they do, the difference is usually marginal. The reason why other mainstream gacha games are heavily criticized for their power creep is because of how fast and sudden it happens, most notably in games like Honkai Star Rail, Genshin Impact, and to a much lesser extent, Zenless Zone Zero. All these games have at least some instances where a character blows the previous power ceiling out of the water to an unreasonable degree. Acheron in HSR, Mavuika in Genshin Impact, and Miyabi in ZZZ are all instances where a character is released and the DPS ceiling is substantially pushed up in a blink of an eye, affecting the game's balance for the worse. For the longest time, Wuthering Waves avoided this issue with their more gradual approach to stealing characters, that is, until Phrolova's release. That may seem like a bold statement. After all, in terms of raw numbers, Phrolova doesn't seem particularly alarming. Her kit doesn't directly top other units like Cardathea or a well-played Zani in bossing content like TOA. Sure, she still performs exceptionally in that game mode, especially with the changes to tower that give Phrolova more time to ramp up, but not to the level where she's problematic. The real issue with Phrolova stems from her performance in the only other game mode, Wuthering Waves. As many veteran players may know, Wuthering Waves is a game mode revolving around defeating waves of small mobs as fast as possible, as opposed to the typical 1 or 2 bosses found in Tower of Adversity stages. As such, in Wuthering Waves, AoE attacks, grouping, and high consistent damage are king. Phrolova ticks all of these boxes. In fact, she ticks them all too well. It would be an understatement to say that Phrolova is powerful in Wuthering Waves. In reality, she is an absolute monster. Phrolova's teams are so strong that they blow any other competition out of the water, both when comparing low-cost and high-cost compositions. The best Wuthering Waves team before her release was largely agreed upon to be Monofusion, consisting of Changli, Brant, and the newly released Lupa just a patch before. Yet this team doesn't hold a candle to even some of Phrolova's lower-cost teams. Pridewin had to go as far as to make an entire tier dedicated only to Phrolova, both with and without signature weapons, which, by the way, she is extremely reliant on, illustrating just how large the gap was. That aside, let's break down exactly what Phrolova actually does. For how simple her gameplay is, there is a lot of detail to her mechanics. The two main elements in her kit are her volatile notes and her aftersound stacks. Phrolova can hold up to 6 volatile notes, which can be red for higher damage, or blue for grouping and CC, or mixed notes for a combined effect. Phrolova obtains a red note when basic attack 3 hits an enemy, or when she uses her enhanced basic. And she gets blue notes whenever she uses a skill or enhanced skill. Phrolova has 3 ways of obtaining mixed notes. 1. After using Echo skill on Phrolova, whichever note she would have normally gotten becomes a mixed note. 2. When using Phrolova's intro, and 3. The first note she obtains after leaving her ultimate becomes a mixed note. When Phrolova reaches 6 notes of any combination, she can then cast her heavy attack, immediately enabling her to use her ultimate, which buffs her and enters her into the Maestro state, which is a fancy way of saying that she transforms into Hecate. You can technically control Hecate manually, but realistically you will immediately swap out and have it attack on auto. Each of the notes previously stacked will now last 4 seconds, and ally echo skills will cause Hecate to perform an enhanced basic. The second mechanic in Phrolova's kit is Aftersound. which is a stacking ramp-up mechanic obtained from Hecate's Enhanced Basic. Each stack will give her crit damage and increase Phrolova's heavy attack multiplier, the latter of which is a unique mechanic that no other unit has. Put into practice, the result of this is a mobbing machine, the most insane grouping both on-field and off-field in the game, while also having high consistent damage to back it up. Previous characters who struggled in AoE content, like, for example, Cantarella, could make use of Phrolova's off-field grouping to hit everyone with their otherwise narrow attacks, fixing the issues of these past units. And it doesn't end there. Phrolova has some additional benefits from inside her kit that pretty much no other DPS in the game has. Outro buffs. Phrolova's rotation is around 9 seconds long, which would be on the longer side for a sub-DPS if it weren't for her high personal damage. Her outro gives 20% havoc damage amplification and 25% heavy attack amplification for 14 seconds. The same buff of your typical sub-DPS unit like Yinlin, Brand, or Cantarella. The only other dedicated main DPS character with an outro buff would be Augusta, which is only a 15% elemental damage amp, a measly buff compared to what Phrolova provides. So not only do you have this ridiculously strong main DPS that power creeps every other DPS in Wuthering Waves, she has the added benefit of being one of the most flexible units in the game if also used as a sub-DPS, capable of wheelchairing heavy attack users like Galbrenna across the finish line in WuWa scenarios. The consequences of the power creep brought upon by Phrolova can already be seen. Shortly after her release, Wuthering Waves' effective HP soared more than double, meaning that mobs became more than twice as hard and slow to kill. Accounts that previously had no issues clearing found themselves struggling without Phrolova, even with previous AoE powerhouses like Camellia and Monofusion. Luckily, they did tone it down starting the next rotation, but the previous one felt almost like a character check. If you had Phrolova, it was hardly a challenge. If you didn't have Phrolova, well, good luck. Thankfully, very established accounts without her could at least still get all the relevant rewards, even if they couldn't fully max out scores. Everyone else, however, were much less fortunate. So now that power creep has spiked considerably, at least in Wuthering Waves, what does this mean for the future of the game? Was it a mistake to release Phrolova in her current state? Yes, it probably was. Is Phrolova going to ruin the game balance forever, dooming the game to HSR levels of power creep? No, probably not. It has been a couple patches since Phrolova's release, and Kuro has been handling it fine. Sure, WuWa is now trivialized for anyone who owns any kind of functional Phrolova team, but the power ceiling has stayed since. When a new character is introduced and spikes damage considerably, it's going to impact game balance for the worse to some extent. However, there are approaches to alleviate consequences. Miyabi's release in ZZZ is often regarded as a mistake from a meta standpoint, as she was simply that much stronger than any of the other characters at the time. However, Miyabi became the new power ceiling, not the new power floor, which is a crucial difference for the health of the game. Environment aside, Miyabi still remains as a top 2 DPS in the game, causing Zenless's power creep to be reasonable. If we take an opposite example, Acheron's release in HSR is what some like to cite as the character that ruined the game. This is because Acheron didn't become the new power ceiling like Miyabi did. She became the new power floor. Character after character was released right after Acheron, each one upping the previous, creating an unending loop of unhealthy power creep we still see to this day. So far, Kuro Games has been taking the former approach, where Phrolova has acted as the ceiling for a couple patches by now, at least for WuWa. We just have to trust them to not break that ceiling again too soon. There's something very worrying about the immediate future of the game, however. Not a new character power creeping Phrolova, but rather Phrolova power creeping herself. We are only a couple weeks away from Qiuyuan's release, and he is expected to give a sizable increase to Phrolova's premium team. Although the exact amount is still up in the air, this is still extremely worrying. Phrolova is the closest thing we have in the game to an end-all be-all unit like Acheron and Miyabi were, being both top tier in Tower of Adversity and the best unit in WuWa by a ridiculous margin, and this is all still without Qiuyuan. Will Qiuyuan's release boost Phrolova to new heights, marking the beginning of true unsustainable power creep? Hopefully not, but only time will tell. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.